it keeps us in that noticing space, doesn't it? I think the more that we can practice that presence, the easier it is to be really present with our families. Mm-hmm. And for me, I think, I want to accept my child and his wholeness and all of who he is, but how can I do that if I don't accept myself and my wholeness and all of who I am?
Welcome to Wild Flow, the podcast with me, your host, Charlotte Pointeau. I'm a wild feminine cycle coach here for the awakened woman who is ready to reclaim her body, menstrual cycle and feminine power, and to live, love and lead in flow with nature's wisdom. In this podcast, I'll share how you can live in sync with your menstrual cycle and life seasons, heal your relationship with your womb and rites of passages, and embody your wild feminine as a multi-passionate woman in life, mothering and business. It's your time to flourish as a cyclical being in this modern world. Are you ready? Let's flow. Today I'm really excited to bring on a guest who I have connected with through my cycle coach community, Sarah Stars. Sarah is somebody who I've really wanted to chat with because she is really passionate about a topic that I am very familiar with, and that's parenting and the intersection of parenting with the menstrual cycle. So Sarah Stars is a cycle coach who works with parents with periods. She helps them to harness the power of their menstrual cycles to improve family life. Her work will help create more flow in your parenting, amp up your creativity, boost your self-compassion, and create a whole lot more ease, which sounds pretty good to me. Sarah is a home educating, stay-at-home mama and a bit obsessed with the Shonda Rhimes shows. She's passionate about peaceful parenting, justice, kitchen dance parties, and helping to create a livable planet for her son to grow up on. Parenting and the menstrual cycle is something that, like I say, I've been curious about and pondering about and noticing for myself. I'm a mother of 3 young children, and I've married to a man who doesn't have a menstrual cycle, even though he's very open to the idea of menstrual cycle awareness. We're still really finding our rhythm when it comes to working with the cycle and my differences and his lack of overt menstrual cycle, and how that we can really hold each other through the month, how we can partner, collaborate, hold space for each other, take one for the team when we're able. And so I'm really happy to chat with Sarah to hear about her experience, the work that she does, her ideas for how we can cycle sync family life with your menstrual cycle, and how that can really help us to be more present and connected with our children and partners. So I hope that this one supports you and that you enjoy listening. Welcome, Sarah Stars, to the Wild Flow podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing really well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. It's a topic that I have been personally very curious about myself. So let's begin with a cycle check-in. I'd love to know if you're happy to share and if you have a menstrual cycle, where you are in your cycle and how that's feeling for you today.
So I'm on cycle day 16. I'm in my inner summer, just about to ovulate. And I'm feeling really upbeat and open, a real sense of aliveness. And there's been so much creative flow and kind of downloads in this summer for me, this cycle. And I would also say that I'm finding my cycles a little bit sticky at the moment. I've been having some ongoing health issues, and we're in the middle of selling our house for an international move. So there's a little bit of that too much energy, that niggling anxiety that's kind of sitting beneath perhaps those more joyful feelings. So just kind of letting myself be in that mild tension with it. It's an ongoing practice for me in my cycle right now.
Yeah, hearing you, that's a lot to be a lot to be moving through. And yeah, hearing you with that underlying tension and anxiety on top of the bubbling summer energy. Yeah. And I'm, by contrast, at the opposite pole of the cycle. So I don't really know which day to call it, to be honest, because I've been spotting for like more than spotting, like having like a very, very light flow for about 4 days. And then today it's just all finally releasing. And so I'm a bit sore in my womb and in my lower back. And I can't decide whether today's day 1 or day 5. So, yeah, technically not day 1 comes after the spotting, but I feel like I've been having a bit more than that. So yeah, just kind of curious as to what's going on in my body, and but just being present with that with the energy. But it's interesting because last weekend, so today is Thursday night where I am and Thursday morning where you are on the other side of the world. So a good few days ago I had the full pull into winter, and that real descent and that kind of separation phase where I felt like I just really needed time by myself. And over the last couple of days I've actually felt like I've had a bit more energy and almost felt a bit more like that shift kind of outwards again, but it's in complete contrast to what my blood is doing. So I'm a bit all over the shop at the minute, and is what it is, just being present with it. So yeah, thank you. I love to hear where you're at. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, you too. And I mean, that's such a beautiful lesson, isn't it? That it's so powerful to learn all this menstrual cycle awareness stuff. And there's so many good books on it, but ultimately it's tuning into your own energy, isn't it? Because often it can look and feel a lot different than we might think it will.
Yeah, totally. I've found that to be the most useful approach to it for me, because I'm not having textbook cycles at all, and I'm trying to wean my daughter off the boob because she's over 2 and she's breastfeeding a lot. Like she would feed all day if she could and all night, and she's just been sick. So I think that's also contributing to throwing out my cycle. But just letting go of the idea of perfection with it and just being curious, patient. A lot of patience. I found myself particularly before my cycle came back earlier this year, there was a lot of impatience around wanting it to come back and wanting to connect with what my cycle was doing and to be able to chart it and learn about what my cycle looks like now after my 3rd baby. And yeah, it's just an ongoing reminder to be patient. I think that's my overall lesson: patience and surrender.
Yeah, and there's this kind of patience and just like accepting the cycle for where it is and what it is right now. I mean, I don't know if this is your same experience, having breastfed multiple children potentially, but I know that even after my cycle came back, breastfeeding hormones certainly impacted my experience of my cycle. Then weaning, certainly I breastfed my son till he was 3.5. So it's been like a year of not feeding him. And after the few months after he stopped feeding, my cycle, the vibrancy and the fullness of my cycle came back in such a way that I hadn't realized how muted it was. So with breastfeeding, I think that's something that's maybe not spoken about in menstrual cycle awareness. There's not a lot of research about the impact of breastfeeding beyond that first initial period when you're not cycling. What the hormones are doing to the experience of the cycle. So that's quite interesting as well.
Absolutely. And I completely agree. I found there's just been very little, like you say, very little information. And every time I have a look at sort of like you say, that same initial postpartum period of, and lots of like the texts assuming that you're going to stop breastfeeding pretty quickly, and for extended breastfeeders. And I think this has been the longest I've fed any of the children, because the other 2 naturally weaned when I was pregnant the next time.
Right.
But then I'd have like 1 or 2 periods which were really irregular in between children. So yeah, I haven't had a proper menstrual cycle for years. And um, when I didn't have a cycle, I could kind of tune in, following the moon and sort of thinking like, oh, today I feel like this season, and today the next day I feel, but there was no real pattern to it at all. It was just very much in the moment. And now I do, but I think last cycle was the first time that I felt like I had the heady heights of summer. I was like, oh my word, I don't know if I've experienced this in my whole life, because pre-children I'd been on the pill for so long, from about the age of
Right.
16. And so um when I first came off the pill to conceive, I didn't know about cycle awareness. It wasn't something I was aware of. I was just trying to pinpoint ovulation for conception. So really, I feel like from a lived experience, I'm really only just getting into it myself, which is really interesting because that's brought up a lot of, just complete side note, like working with women and teaching about menstrual cycle awareness, but from this place of like it not being like a fully embodied lived experience has been really weird for me. It's been really interesting, and now like really connecting in with it as it's coming through. It's like I feel like I'm learning about it all, like having my own menarche all over again. It's like a second menarche, like really learning from scratch almost. I'm having that, taking that view that I'm just letting go of anything that I might have known before and just really taking it like a fresh start with it, a new relationship with it. So it's fascinating. But I think, yeah, the more we can talk about this, the better, because there's so many of us in this situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for that. All right. Well, we are here to chat about parenting and the menstrual cycle. So you are really into working with parents with periods and helping them to work with their menstrual cycles to improve family life. And I have three children, and I'm married. So personally, I'm really curious to learn more from you about this. But I'd love to know how you came to this kind of area of specialty for you. Like what's your story? Would you share that with us?
Yeah, so I first learned about menstrual cycle awareness. I was in my 20s. It was 2015, and I was living in London, and was just like really going to loads of spiritual workshops. And there's so much of that kind of stuff in London, like lots of the big like spiritual authors and um, famous yoga teachers. They'll do workshops in London. So I was just like gobbling that all up really. And my friend who used a whole bunch of modalities in her work herself, she'd connected with this woman that she'd met in LA, and she was doing this angelic breath healing workshop. I was like, I've got no idea what that was, but sounds fascinating. I'm going to go. And it was, I don't necessarily personally relate to the idea of angels, but I love breath work, and it was a really powerful experience. And at the time I had started a podcast, and my friend introduced me to Lisa Lister and said, Lisa's just written this book about periods. I had kind of a reputation of being this, I don't know exactly what the right word is, but like I used words like periods and horny that British people are not always comfortable with. And so she's like, you'll love her. She like loves talking about periods. So you should be great on your podcast. And so I ended up talking to Lisa, who had just written this book called Code Red. And she said, oh, like, let me send you a copy. And yeah, it'd be great to be on the podcast. And she was great on the podcast. That is like in the archives of my website if you want to have a listen. But I mean, the book just blew my mind, learning about menstrual cycle awareness for the first time. And it was, I'd had a little bit of a disillusionment. I think I was starting to become a bit disillusioned with some of the mind, body, spirit stuff, and that kind of personal development world, seeing how it's very tied into a lot of capitalist ideals, often that industry, and how it was in many ways like convincing people that they were broken and needed fixing, and there's a lot of money tied up in it. And I just loved how menstrual cycle awareness is really about becoming your own healer in many ways and tapping into your own knowledge and all this within you. And I just really took it up right away and started charting my cycle and really looking at ways. I was in my 20s. I had just gotten married, but I had so much free time in hindsight. I may have not thought so at the time. I had so much free time to kind of adapt my life to my cycle, and just found it such a powerful kind of awakening, and really tuned me into myself, learning all of that. So I was practicing menstrual cycle awareness for a year, and we decided to start trying to have a baby. And I think because I've been tracking ovulation already for a year as part of my cycle charting practice, that was really incredibly useful data to have. I knew when I was ovulating, I got pregnant right away. And then I felt a little bit adrift without my cycle. And I having done a lot of this work for a while now, I do know there is some kind of like conscious pregnancy and the energetics of pregnancy workout there, but I was really searching for it and not finding it. And I felt a bit adrift without my cycle. And so that's something I really love, working with people of cycle awareness through pregnancy now as well. But once I had my son, Peter, and I found that as I was breastfeeding him, and he sounds similar to your daughter, he just fed all the time as a baby, which babies do. But then, he still fed us all the time as a 3.5-year-old, and my body kind of was like, I can't do that anymore.
Yeah, I hear you.
He was feeding all the time. And I think my cycle came back around 7 months, but I did find a couple of months before that I started to have some of the energetics of the cycle. Like I would have that kind of premenstrual feeling week where I was really like way more reserved and needing a lot of time in, and maybe like, which is hard with a small baby. So maybe feeling a bit more irritable and grumpy with my husband and things like that. And so then my bleed came back and I was so happy. I just felt like it gave me this steady anchor and rhythm to tune back into. But I was a bit like, well, how do I practice menstrual cycle awareness in a really embodied way and really honor its ebbs and flows through our days when I have this child depending on me all the time? When it's, gosh, this is a total aside really, but Peter did not sleep well at all. He woke up like every 20 to 45 minutes for a long time, and then did not sleep for more than 3 hours till he was 2. Like we were tired, to say the least. So how do you like really rest at menstruation? It was just all of this, everything I'd read had mostly been by child-free, mostly self-employed women. So adapting this work to the life with a young child. And now, he's a little bit older now, he's 4. But I just found like there was such a, it wasn't talked about a lot. And, many people with periods do end up having children. So, and knowing how transformative this work could be. And then as I began to experiment with it and do some more research, just things even like that get left out of the conversation. Like I was saying, how much breastfeeding impacted my cycle. And I didn't realize till I was nearly done breastfeeding that the hormones so yes, you are having the hormonal fluctuations and I was still ovulating. But the hormones that are coming from the breastfeeding process, you're essentially in an extended premenstruum, right? So you might have a little bit of ups and downs, but it wasn't, for me at least, it was a much flatter experience. And once I learned about the more hormonal side of breastfeeding and kind of overlaid that with what I knew about cycle awareness, it's like, oh, well, yeah, of course you are naturally in that kind of potentially more insular, reflective, low energy. And, since I did feed him for 3.5 years, it's like, that would have been really useful information to have just for the kind of compassion and grace you can give yourself with it. So seeing how much I think it's improved our family life to have this real menstruality and cyclic awareness running through it. And now I'm really excited to be sharing it with other people.
Thank you very much for sharing your story. That's really helpful to hear. And I resonate with so much of what you shared in there. And, particularly babies that don't sleep and so you were just saying there that you've really noticed that this is really like supported and influenced your family dynamic. Can you share with us how it has? How's that happened?
Yeah. So I think one thing that I feel really passionate about is that so I'm very passionate about the idea of peaceful parenting and parenting that respects the autonomy of the children, that respects the child as a whole person to themselves. They're not like an adult in training, right? They are a whole being right now. And how do we parent in a way that is consensual and respectful and joyful? And, just like the honest truth is that I don't think we can parent that way unless we have really focused on knowing ourselves, on healing some of those wounds that we maybe received as children, and are able to look beyond the way we were parented and choose new ways, and are consistently kind of nourishing ourselves and filling ourselves up. Because certainly when I feel really run down, when I feel like I've not maybe feeling creatively fulfilled, it's much harder to then be in that open, unconditionally loving state that I think my child needs. So menstrual cycle awareness for me is a practice that keeps me so consistently in tune with my own needs and how those fluctuate. And since I have a lot less time to maybe, go to all those spiritual retreats or like spend the weekend, relaxing and meditating and having a really consistent like 1 hour morning routine, that might not feel as doable, but I can stay really in touch with those things that I know will have a big impact. So, people talk about the 20% of what you do having the 80% impact. Through menstrual cycle awareness, I think we can really tune into what those small things that will be really impactful are.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that menstrual cycle awareness is such a beautiful practice in presence, and it's really doable where just by tuning in every day to how you feel, how your needs are fluctuating, it builds so much self-awareness. And it also it keeps us in that noticing space, doesn't it? I think the more that we can practice that presence, the easier it is to be really present with our families.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I think, I want to accept my child and his wholeness and all of who he is, but how can I do that if I don't accept myself and my wholeness and all of who I am? And I think that through menstrual cycle awareness, through meeting those energies that ebb and flow throughout our cycle, through coming up, against those shadows of ourselves that we maybe wouldn't look at otherwise, it has been a practice of growing self-acceptance and self-compassion for me. And then I think that allows me to accept other people and be more compassionate towards them, which is, of course, so essential for families.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. That sounds, I completely agree. And I love what you just said there about, accepting the cycle teaches you to accept your wholeness and all those different parts of us and everything that's brought up as we journey through the cycle. And like you say, the wounds that are there as well as our strengths and the light and the dark and the energetic and creative and productive and the slower, tender, even the moodier parts of us, and how that can teach us to, if we can hold space for ourselves, we can hold space for others and meet them and witness them and love all of them too. I think that's really beautifully put. Thank you. So I'm really curious. Do you notice from your practice, because I've got my own kind of noticing of how it changes for me, but for you personally, how do you notice that your capacity or your parenting style or even your needs, your own self-care needs change across your cycle? And when I say self-care needs, like what do you need to do to hold space for yourself so that you can then hold parent from that place? How does it change across the cycle?
Yeah. So I think one thing would be in my inner summer, especially, and maybe parts of maybe the late spring and early autumn, I just have the capacity to hold more. So I can have more things on my plate. And it is for me, part of that kind of idea of cycle syncing my family rhythms that I talk about sometime is that I do try and, do a bit more cooking. So there's food in the freezer later on. because I just feel like I've got this more open capacity. Things don't necessarily grate on me as much. I don't necessarily need as much time to myself, although I try to be really careful about having some non-negotiables about what self-care looks like through the whole cycle, because I think it can be easy to just like pour all that summer energy out into other people. Um, but I absolutely find, yeah, that I can just keep more of the balls in the air at that time. And so by doing that, I can potentially, if I'm intentional about it, mean that there's fewer balls to manage a little bit later on. Um, and so in the autumn, I certainly feel a need for just a little bit more physical space as well. Like sometimes, you know, my son is very affectionate, which is beautiful, but sometimes it's just like, can you sit in your own chair, you know, like simple things like that, which is like not, you know, I don't think we could even necessarily call that self-care, but sometimes as a parent it's really the little things.
Oh, it really is. Yeah.
Yeah. Could you just sit in your own chair, please? I love you, I'd love to read this book for you, let's hold hands, but can you not be on my lap right now?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and just that feeling of like my personal space extends, and he has like zero personal space. He just wants to be up with everyone, which is gorgeous. But yeah, sometimes, you know, there's those boundaries needed, and I think that's like a real inner autumn and winter work for me as well, is like how to express those boundaries just like from a real place of kindness and compassion, and the need for that for me grows in my inner autumn and winter. And the thing that I find is like the more resourced and nourished and filled up I am, the more I'm able to let those be like a loving boundary, a firm, loving boundary, rather than a roar that, you know, certainly sometimes comes out. There's a lot of creative flow and downloads in my late summer and through my autumn, and also my winter in a slightly different capacity. So just making sure that I'm keeping space open, like through journaling practice. Sometimes it's just notes on my phone, but just to collect those. And that knowing in my autumn and winter that like I kind of pull myself and my availability back a little bit. And that doesn't mean I don't think I've said, but we Peter goes in childcare a few mornings a week while I'm working, but we are a home educating family. So when I'm not like less available to him in the sense that I am physically present, and of course I want to be like present with him, but I might just make sure that we plan more laid back activities during those times, ones that aren't going to create a big mess and maybe put me on edge. So, you know, an example that I give is like if we bake something every week, like maybe during my winter when I have really low energy, we are just like making some no bake cookies where you're just stirring some things in a bowl and that's it. And then, you know, if he wants to make like a chocolate cake with frosting, maybe we'd save that for, that's one of his favorite things to make. We'd like save that for my inner summer when I have that greater capacity to hold things, like I said, and including, you know, holding a tolerance for mess and things like that. And so knowing those fluctuating needs, then I can just kind of tweak what we're doing in our family life to know that it feels more manageable.
Yeah, there's some great ideas in there. And it's curious because for me personally, there's some overlaps and there's some differences. And I feel like in my winter, I really want cuddles and hugs. Like I feel really soft, and I let the girls come in, they make me a cup of tea, and they like to put me to bed and kind of tuck me in, and they're like, oh, mum, you know, and I'm like, oh, can you do, you know, ask them to help me a little bit more and tidy up and kind of delegate to them a little bit more. Like they're 6, 4 and 2. So the older ones I'm talking about there. The younger one just is relentlessly messy and filthy, and she's got no concept of what's going on. But yeah, like, and my energy is so much less. And so I don't feel like, you know, sometimes I can't even fathom taking them to the park, or like, you know, days out, it's like, we're just going to potter around the house and you can just do your thing. And I might get out like the painting and they can paint and make a mess and I don't care. I just sort of think about it later. But it's more like, yeah, letting them kind of just potter and less needing to entertain as such. Yeah. And then when I'm in my early spring, I notice that I get there's like a little wounded part of me that comes out and really like doesn't want to rush back into like the spring and the energy and the outward. I'm like, no, I just want to stay in this gentle, slow state, like just for a little bit longer, where all my expectations are a lot lower, and I take the pressure off completely. And um so I'm like, I don't want to go back into like being Wonder Woman again. I'm not ready for that. So I have this moment happens every time where I sort of feel this shift, and I'm like, oh, it's a bit clunky and I don't really like it. But then once I get into spring, it's it's good. Like I feel like I've got more energy, and I can be a bit more energetic with them. But come summer, it's like I feel like I'm really playful and silly, and like I'm like adventure days. It's like, yeah, no worries, like get in the car, let's go out for the day, and we'll pack a bag and a picnic, and or do all the energetic stuff. And that feels like something I really want to do. um and my husband says that he's like, well, I really like you in summer, like you're more fun. I'm like, oh, thanks. What does that mean about the rest of the cycle? um but it's interesting getting his perspective on it as well, but that's a different topic. I'll come to that next. But then in my autumn, it's like the first, I enjoy the first half of autumn. That's good, and I feel a bit more boundaried, and I can, I want a little bit more space, and I kind of pull back a bit, and but it's okay. But that end of autumn, oh my word, I just want space. I just want them to tidy up, and they will not do it. I just want everything sorted. It's like I want everything wrapped up in a bow, and then I want everyone to fuck off and leave me alone and get out the house. And I'm like, go away. I don't want to see you. I don't want to hear you. And I'm like, I just want my husband to take everybody out and away and just give me like this, just a space to like, so I can collapse in a heap. And I think people being my husband and my children, it's like they hear me, but they're not listening. Like they're like, yeah. It's almost like they're testing me, or it's they're used to me having the resilience to just push through. And there comes a point where I'm like, I mean it, and I need it right now. And that's when everyone gets the message that mum's going to bleed pretty soon, and she needs a bit of space, and she needs it right now. And it's like it's really challenging point of, I run a business, my husband runs a business, we've got one in school, and the others have care 2 days a week, and we have somebody to the house a third day to help for a few hours. And so there's a lot going on, and there's a lot of people's needs to consider, and there's a lot of noise, and we have a small house, and it's pretty challenging trying to like have my needs heard and met. And as the mother, it's like, the old paradigm is that the mother just gives and doesn't even think about herself. And it's like in this era of having such deep awareness and sovereignty and belief that my needs matter just as much as anyone else's, is a real clash with like I think how everyone else sees it. And like my husband is like on board with this, like he's learning about the seasons of the cycle and he knows what it means, but we still have these tricky points in the cycle where even though he's on board, there's like moments of resistance. Like if he's tired, if he's busy with work, if he's overwhelmed, if he doesn't have that capacity to step up and hold that space for me to flop or to withdraw, and I can give that to him in my more resilient phases of my cycle. But I'm really curious to hear from you if you experience anything like that, and how you make that work as a family and a partnership, and if you've got any hot tips for me.
Yeah. I can resonate with so much what you're saying, and I think sometimes, like, what understandably, when people are talking about menstrual cycle awareness and anything, parenting and any kind of self-help, they're talking from these like ideal worlds that don't exist. I don't mean that their world's ideal. It just makes sense to kind of like, I guess, generalize that way, but it doesn't always end up being very helpful because modern life is so full. Most of us don't have very robust support networks, which is, why we're moving to live close to my family in Canada. And everyone's holding a lot. And so I can really resonate with what you said about like, your husband probably wants to give that to you and then he just doesn't have the capacity and he's under his own pressures from work and things. And certainly a lot of that has been like a pressure cooker compounded by the pandemic, I think. So I really could resonate with what you said about those kind of pottering days in your winter. Although sometimes I do find that if there ends up being tension and this need to get away, sometimes for me, getting out of the house is the antidote to that. And I don't know, because I only have one child, so I can't, I imagine just getting 3 kids out. Getting one child out of the house can be a lot. I'm sure getting 3 out of the house is just like a total pickle. But sometimes I just
you
find
need a medal. You need a glass of wine.
Good takeaway. If we can get outside, that I know that I breathe differently outside, and that sometimes like if he's just running in the park and like rolling in leaves, or he like finds a little friend to play with, that there's like a real less of me is required to parent. I don't have to like police any of, we have a pretty like, he's allowed to make messes and he's got open access to his art materials and his toys. It's not like I'm policing him, but like there's less things that would kind of grate on me if I'm in that kind of tension in my cycle. Sometimes if we can get outside easily, and sometimes even though I might not feel very social, if I know if we can meet up with one of his friends outside, I know that for me, it will feel less energy intensive to talk to another parent and maybe like have a cup of coffee while the kids run around in the park versus, where he might feel at loose ends sometimes inside. Another thing that I think is really helpful is like at a point when you're not in that period, so that you're at that kind of, and I know that feeling too, that like real tension building at the end of your cycle and just waiting for that release. And there's something else I'll say about that I think becomes specifically pertinent to parents, but I'll say that in a minute. Like when we're not in that tension, I think anytime there's like, we're finding a point of tension, it could be something non-cyclic or not related to your menstrual cycle. The day is cyclic as well, but maybe you find like getting out the door for school is always a bit tense, or like dinner time. Certainly dinner times were recently really tense. So when you're not in that tension, can you reflect on like, what would be a rhythm? What's a doable thing that could happen? So you recognize that you're coming to that point of separation and perhaps entering the void. And by not being able to enter, a real tension's occurring. Would you be able to kind of like create a big nest out of pillows and blankets for your kids, and they watch a film and you put on an eye mask and earplugs? I have a brain injury, so I have to spend a lot of time with eye masks and earplugs. And I wish I'd known about that. But it's not a nap, but it creates a real reset for your brain. My doctor calls it a brain break. But that kind of thing where you're still there, you can keep them safe. If they really need something, they can ask you, but that you could kind of withdraw, but still be present. And I think it could be really helpful to, like, for me, I know, to sit down with my husband and like talk through what the tension is. And then both of you kind of, I don't know if you know nonviolent communication at all, but that can be a helpful framework. You can look it up and there's little templates that you can use, but using that framework of like, I'm feeling like this, these are my needs that are not being met. He can express like what his needs are in the situation, what his capacity, and then like just brainstorming so that you've got like a little go-to solution when those occur. And maybe it's a handful of things, like if he's not working, he could take the kids to the park. If he is working, he can do a movie or whatever those things are. But I find it really helpful to figure out what's a new rhythm. I've been finding like our weekends a little bit clunky recently. And so just sitting down and thinking about like, okay, what are the life admin that has to get done on the weekend? What are the things that are going to fill us up and that we want to prioritize? And how do we kind of create a free flowing, not a rigid routine, but some free flowing rhythm that we can yeah, that we can use there to create a more joyful weekend. I don't know if that helps at all for thinking about that point in your cycle.
Yeah, that's lovely. Thank you. You just reminded me, I love eye masks and I've got this really great like sleep mask. And the other day, which it was one day at the start of the week, I think it was, and I went and I lay down and I had my sleep mask on and because I had a really bad headache as well. So I went and lay down and I did put a movie on for the kids and they never just sit still. They're just kind of like jumping up and down and wriggling around and it's like, oh dear. And so I came back out and I had my it was one of those wrap around the head
Mm.
sleep masks and I was just wearing it for the whole day. And my husband's like, do you need that on your head still? And I'm like, yes, I do. It's just giving me like just a bit of comfort, hugging my head and just kind of reminding me that it was almost like an anchor to that energy of just like cocooning and resting and like kind of like not being fully present in the world. I don't know. It was very comforting. So I love that you mentioned sleep masks and brain breaks.
Yeah, I think just that thing, like having young children can be a real sensory overload. And then for those of us
Yeah.
who have processing issues, that's tricky. And then there are certain parts of our cycles where I think sensory overwhelm is more sensitive. And something that I've gotten since having, similar to the eye mask, since having a brain injury, is that there's earplugs that you can get that I think they're originally designed for going to gigs so that you don't get hearing damage, but now being marketed cleverly to parents as a way to just like tone things down a notch. So the ones that I have,
Genius.
yeah, right? They're called Vibe, the ones I have. And there's also a similar brand
I'm
in the
writing
UK
that
called,
down.
yeah. And I don't know how many decibels they take things down, but like I can still, since having the brain injury, if I go to a cafe or for like out somewhere, it will be noisy, but there's also just certain points of the day where, like around dinner time, there's times when the volume just goes up that bit and I'm like not as resourced because we've gone through the full day and I'm, feeling a bit tired and I just pop them in. I can still talk. It's a little bit, I find like being underwater, but it just really is that similar kind of cocooning things where it just takes things down a level for me. And like, so that I don't get to that point where it's like overwhelming and feels over my head with so much sensory input. So I think those, yeah, potentially for people who experience that as well can be really
Mm.
helpful. And the other thing I was going to say, yeah, I mean, I think in those phases of your cycle, for me, it's more in the winter. And I think you said like having those pottering days, any way that you can just embrace the horizontal parenting. So I think for kids that can, we can maybe feel like, oh, that's a cop out. It's not like those Pinterest worthy activities, but like a day where there's like special snacks and you get to watch a movie or like sticker books that you just pull out when mom needs to like lie down. Peter and I will often cuddle up in my bed when I'm bleeding and listen to audiobooks. Or if I feel up for it, like I'll read a big stack of books to him. And just those things where it's like really just like still a real close connection, isn't it? That you can just be lying down. I think that's really great. Something that seems to be a pattern for many parents that I've been working with and speaking with is that, and I think because you were saying how there's that little bit of you that can feel a bit jilted maybe by needing to come out of spring more quickly than you want to, or not wanting to come out quickly. And I think one thing that I think people, when they start to rest and honor their period, sometimes it can then feel like, okay, I've done it. I've had, I've really got all this piled up that I need to take care of. And especially maybe, well, it feels like maybe, especially with young children, that there can be this feeling of urgency. And I think a lot of people assume that the kind of spring energy is very similar to the summer energy and not recognizing what a slow progression it really is, like a freshness and newness, a slow planting seeds rather than a bolting right out of the gate. And I've heard from a lot of parents who are finding that they are experiencing kind of winter-like feelings in their summer and that they're actually having that uptick of energy more as soon as they start to bleed. And my suspicion is that if you are bolting really quickly out of the gate after you start bleeding or in your spring, that you could really easily be burning. And I don't mean you, sorry, I'm speaking to like a universal, like a common experience that seems, and I've certainly experienced it myself, that you can easily be burning out by summer and feeling really flat out. And then that tension continues to build and can create really difficult PMS type symptoms. And then the bleed becomes that feeling of release, feels like the uptick in energy, and that cycle can kind of go on and on. Not necessarily, it's not that there's something wrong with having an archetypal cycle, but if I think sometimes that seems to be really common for parents, where there's like a real switch there. And I think potentially if you're finding that it's leading to difficult, challenging symptoms and experiences, it might be worth investigating whether there's a way to rest more at menstruation, which I know is not necessarily easy, but to just take things a little bit more slowly through that menstruation and spring and let your energy build, and that could help bring a bit more balance.
Yeah, absolutely. I find interestingly that many of the women that I work with who are parents really struggle. There's premenstrual symptoms, but when we explore what's going on, it's that bolting out into spring too fast, and it's really like people are enjoying the bleed time, like really like savoring that slowness and that hibernation, and it's not something that people are struggling with, but it's that spring where they might not be feeling like on a surface level that it's a problematic time, but behaviorally, like the way they're setting themselves up for the rest of the cycle, it all comes back to that time of just going too fast and like being pulled out. And like I find as well, and I've heard it with other people saying that their partners are like, oh good, you're done bleeding, here, like you take the reins again. And it's that sense of like, oh, the good times are over. And, it's almost like you get permission to rest during your bleed. And your partner's like, if they're kind of on board with the whole thing, it's like, okay, like this is the time when, I know that, you're bleeding. So I'll step in and, do whatever. But it's like the moment it's over, it's like, right, back to you. And so that's one part of it. And the other part of it is, like you were saying, like this growing to-do list of everything that's been left to go on the back burner and to create that space over the bleed. And then it's like staring people down like this, the pressure of needing to get through all this stuff and jumping back into it. And when you've got that extra energy, you feel like you can burn the candle a bit more at both ends. And it's so tempting, and to enjoy that creativity and that, that desire to be in that more socially accepted energy of being there for other people and doing all the things, and a bit more Wonder Woman type energy. And it's so tempting to just really step back into that and embody it. But one of the things that I love about the cycle so much is that even if our cycle is not exactly as like the archetypal cycle is, there's so much wisdom in it that it's that way for a reason. That's how we have sustainability. That's how we, that's what happens in nature. And, the earth has lived for, oh my God, don't even know how many millions and millions and millions and millions of years. And, we're here in a blink of an eye, burning out at lightning speed because we're not living in that way. And, really looking to that cycle to remind us, the benefit, even if we don't feel like we're having, the slowness in the bleed and then the peak in the summer and, the up and the down, like the shoulder seasons. But whenever it is, as long as at some point we're having that balance, I think that's the important lesson. And, role modeling that to your children and to your partner, and saying that it's important. And, even if they're not people who do or will have a menstrual cycle, all of us getting to that place of honoring that. So with your son, you've got a son. I'm just curious how you're raising him to be cycle aware and period positive, even though he's
Yeah. So, I
4.
mean, I've got a couple of posts that I've done on Instagram recently about this, and it's been lovely to see the conversations and just think about the ripple effects that they're going to be about so many people raising their children to be so cycle aware. What a beautiful gift it will be for the ones who do menstruate to have that wisdom from the beginning, but I think also for the ones that don't. And I think you can see with young children how menstrual stigma and shame is entirely socially constructed because Peter, from like probably before he could talk, he's like toddling into the bathroom with me and he's just like curious about it, right? And he's not disgusted. I know some children will sometimes worry that because there's blood that their parent is in pain or suffering. He, I don't think ever thought that, maybe just because as soon as he asked, I was very clear to him that, it wasn't hurting me, that it was normal, that it's something that happened every month. So I've just been from the very beginning very open about the physiological process. And in those Instagram posts, I put a couple of like ideas at different ages, what those explanations might look like. So for him at this age, it's just talking about the fact that my body creates a little nest in my womb. He knows that he at one point grew in my womb, obviously. Yeah, a little in the post I talk a little bit, what that might look for adoptive families and families where non-birth families. But anyways, for he knows that he grew in my womb and then was born. And so just that there's like a little nest growing in there every month that would make it a soft, cushy, safe space if we were to have another baby. But because we're not having another baby, every month that little nest comes out and another one grows the following month, kind of thing. And that kind of makes sense to him. It has brought up some questions because he's going to be a one and only, that why aren't you putting another baby in there? But that's a whole other thing. And so I've mostly talked about the cycle energetically with him in terms of my period so far, and I think that I can grow on that awareness for him as he gets a bit older and a bit more interested. But certainly he understands that I have less energy and probably eat more chocolate when I'm bleeding, that he might need to just like let me lie down with a blanket. That he knows, like, I get my hot water bottle out, those kind of things. And so he like, I think what you're saying with your children, can be quite nurturing and sweet about helping like take care of mommy when I'm bleeding. And I think it's really important that whether a child will menstruate or not, that they are raised with a full awareness of what that biological process is. I mean, yeah, there's so much that that menstruators' partners should know, but are not taught. And then we weren't taught about our own bodies as well. And I think that will be a big part of helping to eliminate the stigma on a societal level. And whether or not he will have partners who menstruate, I don't know, but he'll certainly have friends and family members who menstruate, and being able to be supportive of their cyclic experience, I think, is really important. Yeah. And I just think it takes the shame out of it, doesn't it? If they just know in a really accurate, honest way what's happening, how powerful even just those simple things are.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah, I love that you're just being really open with him right off the bat. And I agree. And I use the same analogy, like a nest. And today I was sat there with a hot water bottle, and my daughter came home from school. She got off the school bus and she said, "Oh, I want the hot water bottle." And it's like, "No, mummy needs it. Like my back's a little bit sore today." "Why?" It's like, "Because I'm bleeding." And my 4-year-old was asking as well, and why. And we have this conversation, and I think I tell them every month, and they ask the questions again, and it's like they're testing, like is the explanation the same, like just checking their understanding, and just always really like, "Oh yeah, cool." I always, because I wear period pants, and so I soak them and have the bloody water, and ask them which flowers they want to go and pour the the blood on each month, and they quite enjoy that. They think it's quite cool because then we see that the flowers are doing well and they're blooming more, and it's like, it's magic blood. And but yeah, I think I completely agree, just being really transparent. And I think it can feel really I mean, there's all kinds of different experiences, and I still hear a lot of people horrified at the idea of that, really, really keeping it secret, and, thinking that it's something that we really, really need to, wait until they're older, until they're old enough to kind of understand. But I believe that the earlier they witness just the normal day-to-day process of living in our body, the better. So yeah, I love what you shared there. Thank you.
I think so often our society gets things backwards with what they think. Because I really do believe in protecting the kind of sanctity of children, of childhood, and letting them be little and not making them grow up too quickly. And I certainly don't think that knowing about periods threatens that. I often think that society kind of burdens children with too high of expectations of things that aren't developmentally appropriate, or, they're learning about things that could genuinely be quite traumatic and scary, and then isn't kind of honoring their capabilities as whole, capable people, and trusting them with things that I certainly don't see any reason why that knowledge would be damaging. And I think if you do press people on it, they're often like getting a bit of a fluster. Like they might not be able to articulate this, but it's way more about their embarrassment and shame around their bodies. And certainly I used to find embarrassment and shame around my cycle, but I've never heard a good reason why children shouldn't know about menstruation.
I think that's a really good point that you just made there about the difference between telling them too much that's not age appropriate and that's, too much for them to understand and take on versus this is something that's normal and that we can explain, and, using language and, like the nest analogy, for example.
Yeah. Like, I don't think people think it's weird when young children like play about guns and superheroes. And, I know there's mixed views on when and whether that's appropriate. And the fact that like that kind of violence is societally normal, but a really basic, important biological function is very backwards to me.
Totally hear you on that. I completely agree. Thank you. Okay. I just had one more question that I just wanted to throw at you. Just something that I was thinking about. I was talking to somebody recently, and we were talking about, these different experiences that we can have. And just as talking about parenting, I just wondered if you had any sense, this doesn't appear to be your lived experience, but for people who are solo parents, single parents, single mothers, or single parenting and having a menstrual cycle, do you have advice or do you have a perspective on, because obviously that's going to be quite challenging at certain times when you're the person who's carrying the load. And like you say, a lot of us don't have support where we live. Some people absolutely do. And just wondering whether you had anything to add to the conversation around, that someone who's listening who's a solo parent might benefit from.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is not my experience. And so it would always welcome people to, if you have your own ideas, that this would be an interesting conversation to have. But a few things that could be helpful, and something that I feel really strongly about, and it's just been like this deep in my bones, in my womb, like call and ache, is that I think it's really important, like activism that is at the governmental level, all of those things are important for creating change. But I think this yearning that many of us are having for community and belonging and really strong support networks, we have to create them. And it's uncomfortable sometimes. And it's, because it's just not what we are encouraged to do in this very individualistic society, but to like put our needs on other people, even though that we may know that helping someone else meet their own needs is really life affirming and feels good, doesn't it? But yeah, thinking about what it might look like to create that support network for yourself in whatever ways are possible. And it might be starting really, really small, but like if you have another parenting friend who you could potentially do some childcare swaps with sometimes, depending, on your financial situation, if that's like paying for childcare sometimes, paying to have meals come in sometimes, and just knowing, because I think there can be a lot of beliefs around that we've inherited, that we have to do it all, and that if we're like relying on a cleaner or a babysitter or a meal delivery service, that somehow we're like not living up to our responsibilities as a mother and a person. And I think we can intellectually know that's all nonsense, and still be having the uncomfortable feelings about it. But if you've got that kind of financial position, I think those can be really wonderful paid support networks, and knowing that that's like a gift to the person providing the service as well, right? That's their livelihood. I know some people who work independently as cleaners, and they're able to make a wage that they're really happy with. And yeah, I just think that is a form of mutual support, as long as people are being paid fairly and everything. But I do, I'm really interested in this idea of how we build these strong support networks and communities ourselves. And I think sometimes, even like through like-minded Facebook groups, I found local friends, and just like starting to like put that out there with people, like, would you want to swap childcare? Especially through this pandemic, we have one family locally where we've just like, when we've needed to, we've just leaned on each other if someone had to self-isolate and get groceries. And someone who I follow, Abby Smeeson on Instagram, I think she's a really beautiful example of someone who's just really trying to build that network and those roots for her geographic area, for her community, but also for her own family. And she writes really beautifully about that. I just find it inspiring to see other people and the ways that they're doing that, and how can we factor that in. And certainly just thinking about the ways that maybe with your children, you can do a little bit of cycle syncing. So something that I find really helpful is that, and actually on my website, sarahstars.com, I have a blog post that has this all listed out, but I have a 4-week meal plan that is like quote unquote cycle sync. So it's not about eating different foods at different phases of your cycle, but it's more about like having easier meals at certain types of my cycle, and like maybe like a bit more complex meals at different phases of my cycle. But you can go there and check that out. And there's also like a free download if you want to just like, we eat meat and you might not, or you might have allergies, so that those recipes don't work, which is showing you my kind of little formula that I plug the recipes into. Because then when I don't really feel like thinking of what to cook, I just got this list of recipes that I know we all like. And part of that is that at least once a week, but often twice, I'll make something that's kind of like a big one pot meal. So like we had a chicken stew last night that we all really like, with like chili, sometimes a big like baked mac and cheese, and I'll make twice as much of it so that we can freeze some of that. And I think that's just like so supportive for anyone, but especially I think if you're solo parenting, to just know that you have those meals in the freezer when you need them. I tend to rely on them when I'm bleeding, but it's just nice to know they're there at any time. And in addition to that, that also, includes fish fingers and chips, and it doesn't have to be like home cooked meals all the time. Giving myself a lot more grace in that area has certainly been helpful. It doesn't always have to be a home cooked meal. Hopefully those things would be helpful. Thinking about how you can just take some of the pressure off, like look at what's non-essential and just let it go for a little bit, and knowing that you can come back to it. But if the house needs to be a bit messier for a season of your life, if you need to eat more like freezer dinners for a season of your life, knowing that it's all okay, like everyone's going to be okay, and taking some of that pressure off. I know it's been really helpful for me through this pandemic as well.
Some great ideas, thank you. And we'll link to your blog post on your website with the meal plan for the month for the cycle. I think that's a great idea, and I would like that very much. So thank you. Beautiful. Well, as we wrap up what's been a really lovely conversation, Sarah, I'd just love to ask you just my question that I love to ask all my guests as we end. Just would love to hear from you. What's been the biggest gift of connecting with your cycle? What's that given you?
Yeah, so many things. I think that ultimately that kind of access to really deep access to my intuition and really full picture, technicolor kind of self awareness. Because I think over time that's has so many knock on effects, like how much my self trust has grown, how much my ability to take care of myself has grown, and my ability, like I said, to be really present and connected with my family. And I think all of those things grow out of that kind of access to my intuition and a real trust and knowledge in what I am, who I am, what I'm feeling, what I intuitively know, and all of that. Yeah, has so many gifts within it.
Mm. Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's been a really, really great conversation. I've learnt heaps from you, and I really feel that people who are listening will feel themselves reflected back in our experiences, but also have ways of accessing what's going to work for them in their own parenting journey, their own unique menstrual cycle as well. So thank you so much for joining us. It's been really, really lovely.
Thank you so much, Charlotte.
I hope that you really enjoyed that conversation between me and Sarah. If you'd like to connect with Sarah, you can follow her on Instagram at Sarah Stars, which is STARRS_. And also her website is sarahstars.com. I'll put the links to those and the blog post that she referenced in the show notes. Okay, lovelies, until next time, have a great week. Thank you so much for listening in. If you're loving this podcast and you'd love to help me spread the wisdom shared, please leave a review or rating, or share this with somebody who you think would love to listen in. I'm really passionate about creating ripples of change and getting this information to more women, girls, and people with a cycle so that they can reclaim their cyclic natures too. And if you'd love to dive in deeper with learning more about how to connect with your cycle and rites of passages, come and join our free Wild Flow Circle community, or choose a course and learn with me on my online learning hub. All the links are in the show notes. And until next time, be well and go with the flow of your cyclic nature.